Once upon a time there was a pretty fly. He had a pretty wife, this pretty fly. But one day she flew away, flew away. She had two pretty children, but one night these two pretty children flew away into the sky, into the
Night Chill Audio presents The Night of the Hunter, written in 1952 by Davis Grubb, read by James Ross Spencer. Book 2, The Hunter.
Run, puppy, run! Run, puppy, run! Yonder come the big dog! Run, puppy, run!
Child's Rhyme. This was toward the end of March. On the Monday of the third week of Preacher's stay at Cressup's Landing, he told Walt Spoon that he had made up his mind to stay on through the spring. And since he had no money, it was his intention to wait until he could pick up a little work on one of the larger bottomland farms and pay off his debts, and then in May or June he would hold a grand spring revival over in Jason Lindsley's orchard. Few country preachers work full-time at it. Most of them are farmers, or they hire out for the harvest, or do store work in the lean times, and so to Walt Spoon this seemed a plainly sensible plan. Mamie Ernest, as much taken in by the preacher's grand manner as the rest of them, did not so much as mention the matter of board and room he owed her for, and it was tactfully agreed that he would pay for these things when he could. Old friend Martin, the regular pastor at Cressup's Landing's little frame Presbyterian church, gave Preacher a perfectly good old black overcoat and invited him to preach at his own pulpit. Everyone was completely won by the preacher's flashing eyes and his rolling, booming voice, and the sermon about the right and left hand. Fingers had the congregation buzzing and chattering all the way home that Sunday. Willa kept on at her job at the confectionery, and it was a fairly common thing before long for Preacher to come by of an evening to talk to her about Ben's last day and to enjoy a cocoa and a platter of Icy's cakes. There was never of course, a breath of bad gossip about these casual intentions, because everybody could see the two of them quite plainly through the window of the ice cream parlor. Icy, however, had launched upon an all-out campaign to fan the friendship into a sort of refined interest that would lead to Willa's second marriage. But Willa resisted. "No, Icy, it's too soon after Ben's passing for me to be thinking about marrying again. Besides nothing," cried Icy, popping a little frosted cube of Turkish delight in her mouth. "That feller is just aching to settle down with some nice woman and make a home for himself here in Cressup's Landing. Willa, I declare, I don't know what's the matter with you. Are ye blind? Deed, it ain't every day in the week that as a nice a man as that comes down the pike. And you can bet your bottom dollar, my fine girl, there'll be some smart young sister between here and Captinia. We'll snap him up if you don't." "John doesn't like him much." "Pshaw!
Young'uns, it'll be a sad day when a sassy britches like that John of yours can stand up and tell their elders what's right and wrong.
Well, I suppose.
Besides, honey, what about Pearl? She just dotes on him.
Yes, that's so, Icy.
Fiddlesticks! It's only natural for boys to feel sorry while sort of loyal to the memory of the father. You mark my word, Willa, that boy wouldn't cotton up to no man you picked to marry.
Gracious, Icy. Here we are just talking about it like he's gone and asked me.
Shoot now, ain't no man ever asked a woman if she don't find a way to let him know she's ready.
Willa had finished polishing the long silver soda spoons, and now she was arranging them neatly in a long row behind the fountain. She sighed and lifted her troubled eyes to Icy's impatient scowl. There's something else, she said softly.
Well, the only thing else I can think of is you just naturally can't see yourself in the same bed with him.
No, it's not that. I don't much care about that anymore. I don't think I ever want to have those feelings about any man again. It's not love I'm hunting anymore. I reckon I've had my chance and that's already done. If I was to marry again, Icy, it wouldn't be for no other earthly reason than to give the kids a father and a provider.
Then what in heaven's name is wrong with Mr. Powell? He wouldn't make much, but it would be a comfort to your soul to...
It's the money, Icy, she breathed quietly, and commenced polishing one of the spoons over and over again with swift, nervous rubs of the fragrant cloth. Icy grunted.
Pshaw, that money! I declare you'll let that money haunt you to your grave, Willa Harper.
I reckon that's so, Icy, said the girl. It's always there, bloody and evil and covered with sin. My sin as much as Ben's. Icy, I feel like I ought to have to pay for it just as much as he's done some ways, like I've driven him to it.
Such barefaced foolishness. It's gone, I tell you.
There's no way I can tell, said Willa, staring at her chapped hands, whether he knows about it or not.
Who knows?
Mr. Powell.
Well, shoot, I reckon he should know about it. Everybody in Marshall County knew. It was in the Moundsville Daily Echo, the whole story. I reckon it was even in the Wheeling papers, too. Folks talk about it all the time down the Panhandle. But what in the world has his knowing about's got to do with anything? Will you please tell me that?
Willa shivered.
Maybe, she whispered, he knows where it's hid.
It's at the bottom of the Ohio River. That's where it's hid.
Well, maybe not.
It was a warm night for the end of March. Walt had left the front door to the ice cream parlor open when he went out after supper to gossip with the old men down at Darley Stidger's store, and yet it was not spring. Although winter was dead and the moon was sickly with the neitherness of time between those seasons, those last few weeks before the cries of the green frogs would rise as stitching clamor from the river shores and meadow bogs. How would I know, said Willa presently, if Preacher was to ask me to marry him, that he wasn't just after the money? Maybe he thinks I've got it hid somewhere.
Oh, honey, he's a man of God, said Icy gravely. It's plain enough to me.
Oh, I know, Icy.
Besides, it was wrote plain enough in the paper how Ben wouldn't tell, how Mr. Glumfrey said he might get him off with life if he told, and he still wouldn't tell.
Secretly, said Willa. He could have told me secretly and give it to me to hide.
Oh, well, did he?
No.
Well, then why don't you come right out plain and ask Mr. Powell if Ben ever said anything to him about it?
About the money?
Yes.
You think that was queer, Icy?
Well, fiddlesticks. A man never knows what a woman really wants.
Besides, like you say, he's a man of God. I'd be ashamed to have him know I have suspicion on him.
Hark, cried Icy, holding up a finger. That's him a-comin' up Peacock Alley now.
Yes, cried Willa, flushing. That's him a-singing. Don't he have the grandest singing voice? They could have heard it a moment before they had been still. Preacher's sweet tenor, and he drew close along the sidewalk, singing the old hymn.
Oh, Icy, I'm a sight. Pshaw, you look grand. Now fill him up with cocoa. Willa, men can't think good when they're getting fed. Icy ran off to the kitchen so she could listen at the crack. But the old woman's ears did not serve her well in these late years, and she knew nothing of what the two had said until 10 o'clock struck and Willa returned, flushed and happier, looking that Icy even remembered seeing her. Has he gone? Yes, Icy, yes. Well, child, what's the commotion? Willa flung herself upon the old woman's shoulder, hugging her, and sobbed happily. Oh, here now, here, what's all this? Oh, Icy, it's just such a load off my mind. Did he ask you to marry him? No, it's not that, Icy, it's about the money. Well, gracious sake alive, stop fidgeting and tell me, what now? Icy, I just come right out bold and brass and asked him straight. Asked him about the money? Icy, I just said, did Ben Harper ever tell you what he done with the money he stole? And Mr. Powell just looked at me funny for a minute with his head on one side, and directly he smiled and he said to me, why, my dear child, don't you know? And I told him I didn't know, and I said I asked Ben myself during those last days, and he would never tell me because he said the money had the curse of Cain on it, and if I was to have it, I'd just go to hell headlong. Well, then what? Wait now, I'll get to it, Icy. Then Mr. Powell just looked at me peculiar for a moment, and then he finished his cocoa, and he smiled, and he said, well, now, I'm mighty surprised he wouldn't tell you, my child. And I says, well, whatever do you mean, Mr. Powell? And he says, because the night before they hanged him, he told me where that money was. He told Mr. Powell? Yes. Then where? Now, wait now, Icy, I'm getting to it. He said Ben sent for him that night and said that the curse of that money had soured on his conscience long enough. He said he wanted to leave this world without leaving that gold behind for the old, poor, weak mortals to lust after and murder for. Icy pursed her lips rapidly, her black eyes twinkling like hatpins in her flushed, plump face. And Ben told him that night with the money was gone where it would never do no one any harm because of the sin and greedy will of us of poor mortals like himself. Oh, the clock in the hall rattled suddenly and rustled like an awaking bird. It chimed the quarter hour. Then where's the money? At the bottom of the river, said Willa, gladly, wrapped around a 12-pound cobblestone. Ah, Lord, it's a blessing from God, Willa. Praise be, a blessing from God. Yes, Icy. Oh, yes. And I can mind that time when I would have sold my soul to Satan himself to know how I could lay hands on that bloody gold. Oh, Icy, sin gets such a hold sometimes. There was nights when I want to know about that money so bad I even forget the awful thing that was going to happen to Ben up there in Moundsville Penitentiary. That's what sin and greed will do to a human soul, Icy. Praise Jesus! Yes, Willa, yes. But Ben took care of me, Icy. Even in death, he kept me from that awful sin that money would have brought with it. Oh, yes. Oh, that's true, honey. I feel clean now, Icy. My whole body's just a-quivering with cleanliness. Oh, I know, honey. I know. The money was cursed. It was that, cursed and bloody. Praise Jesus! And now God has saved me from it. They subsided, uttering like crooning cries of emotion, and directly Icy bent forward into her rocker and shook a finger gently under Willa's nose. And now, she cried softly, you know that when Mr. Powell asks you to marry him, that it won't be for that. You know well and good that man of God like him don't give a whip stitch about the money or not. It's a cinch he's not staying here at Cressup's Landing just for the fun of helping Jason Lindsay with the second plowing. Oh, no, reflected Willa. I know that, but still what, honey? I just can't help wondering how little John will take the news. About what? About the money, Icy. Pshaw, why tell him all that? Yes, said Willa. Yes, I'm going to tell him. He should know. She was silent a moment. It's all so strange, Icy. Willa's eyes were bright with the old fear again.
All along, she said, I had the feeling that John knew something. John thought, I will go with this because not going would make them think. What does he know? Why is he afraid for us to see him? Is he afraid we'll make him tell? He thought, because Mr. Powell knows. He knows I know where the money's hid. He has always known that. Why he told Mom that fib about Dad saying the money was in the river. That's so he can have me all to himself, get it out of me his own way. Oh, I'm afraid of Mr. Powell. I'm more afraid of him than I've ever been of shadows or the thunder, or when you look through the little bubble in the glass of the window in the upstairs hall, and all of that door stretches and twists its neck. Willa called, Pearl! John, you ready? Yes, he thought. Oh, yes, I'm ready. Because I mustn't let them know I'm afraid, and I must keep on pretending I'm brave because I promised I would be. When the blue men come and took him away that day, I promised that I would take care of Pearl with my life, and I promised I would never tell about what he made me swear not to do. His name is Preacher. His name is Harry Powell. But the names of the fingers are E and V and 0 and L and E and T and A and H. Oh, that story he tells about the one hand being hate and the other hand being love is a lie because they are both hate. And to watch them move scares me worse than shadows, worse than the wind. Willow, in a pretty new hat from Moundsville, was busy by the pump tucking the last of the sandwiches into the picnic basket. Pearl's hair was brushed till the ringlets shone like dark carved wood against the shoulders of her bright gingham dress. John waited transfixed with his thoughts on the back porch. John, you ready? Have you got your hair brushed? Yes, ma'am. She came to the screen door and glared at him. Young man, just kindly wipe that pout off your face. Gance I give you more of what you got the other night. He sighed heavily and turned from the door, staring at the yard pump, at the smokehouse, and beyond the picket fence where the hills were peppered now with the first green smoke of spring. It had come overnight, a burgeoning and a stirring in the land that was tired and musty, smelling like the flesh of old folks after the death of winter. Now the land was alive, and the air was ripe and musky with the spring river smell, like the ripe, passionate sweat of a country waitress. He could hear them preparing for the day's outing. It was to be a church picnic downriver at Raven Rock, at the old Presbyterian graveyard where his father was buried, and all is lost. Forgotten people before him. They were taking a little chartered packet downriver, and at nightfall they would return. John thought, is God one of them? Is God on the side of the fingers with names that are letters like the letters on the watch in Miss Cunningham's window? There now, Willow was saying to Pearl. You look just grand, honey. Aren't you happy we're all going to a picnic with Mr. Powell? Oh, yes, John thought. But I can't hate Pearl. Dad said I couldn't hate her because she's mine to protect with my life. But I'm scared. I'm scared more than I was ever scared of the dark or wind or the twisting bubble world. But then I reckon Dad was scared too when the blue men took him away. But he was brave, and that's what you have to be. Preacher appeared in the hallway. Willa and Pearl ran to greet him, and John knew Willa would be holding Pearl and the doll up to kiss and be kissed by the preacher, and there was nothing he could do to stop that. John! John! Come on now, we're leaving. Off on the sweet morning wind he heard the foolish women hoot of the little steamboat at the wharf. He turned and pushed through the screen door and into the kitchen to where they were. His hair was flattened and itching where she had wet it down and brushed it slick flat, and his thighs scratched and tingled against the harsh cloth of the good Sunday knickers. And there's my boy, there's my little man. Good morning, John. Morning. He tried to smile because they might ask him questions if he didn't smile.
Willa, you were truly left a priceless legacy with Brother Harper passed on. These fine young'uns. Willa flushed with pleasure and patted Pearl's curls more neatly against her shoulder. Priceless beyond the worth of much fine gold, Preacher said, the laughter of these precious little children. John stared. The finger named H reached over and chucked him under the chin. John thought, she says he is a man of God, and so God is one of them. God is a blue man. Yes, Willa said, I'm right proud, Mr. Powell. Such a comfort they've been to me. John thought, I wish it was night. I wish I was in bed under the comfort. I wish the wind was blowing and the darkness was being, because I am not as much afraid of them as I am of the fingers whose name is H and A and T and E. Well, I reckon we better be getting down to the boat, Boomer Pritch. They followed him and the picnic basket in his hand, and in Peacock Alley it was spring, and the warped mossy bricks of the pavement were covered with little green wings from the silver maples, and they crunched under their feet, and the air was blue and green and yellow with little broken soft pieces of sun that blew on the river wind. At the wharf John spied the face of Uncle Bertie, and Willa stiffened when the old man waved courteously, and she told John he should not speak to that dirty old man. Then John saw Walt Spoon and Icy, and looked for the others on the landing, and by the wharf boat the little stern wheeler lay waiting, its stack puffing white clouds impatiently into the raspberry cobbler sky. Forevermore, what a pretty day, sighed Willa, her cheeks pink by the air, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Well, sure, it's spring. That's why it's so pretty, laughed Walt Spoon, and led them all through the wharf boat and up the little plank onto the boat. There was really no cabin. They sat in the shelter of the little boiler deck by the railings, where they could look out over the broad expanse of rich, motionless river and the rolling hills of spring beyond the water, and in its reflections another spring, another world. Here, John, come and sit by me and Pearl and Mr. Powell. John obeyed, stiff with fright that had long gone beyond the prerogative of anger or protest, moving now to the dumb biddings of muscle he had set in motion from an earlier onset. He squatted by the borrowed folding chair. There were dozens on the deck, borrowed from a funeral parlor, beside his mother, and listened as Icy Spoon chatted on about a lantern, a slideshow some missionary fellows was going to give at the church, and he could smell the steam and the boat and the smell of Walt Spoon's pipe, and back in the wharf boat Uncle Bertie Steptoe was picking out a silly tune on a rusty old banjo. Gracious, cried Willa, when the whistle blew again, surrounding them for an instant in a shivering glass ball of sound. Land sakes, we're moving, cried Icy. And old friend Martin, the preacher of the church, lifted his enormous palm as on cue, and Nellie Bloyd, the choir leader, raised her sweet soprano voice in a hymn. They were all singing now, the voices of different textures and size mingling together into a curious and pleasant chord. Shall we gather at the river, where bright angel feet have trod? John watched the land move, the wharf boat move, the world moving slowly away from them with the dark water's intervention, stranding them somehow upon the river's implacable face, and he thought, it will be all right because Pearl is sitting on the other side of him, and the doll is where he can't see it. Nothing will happen. It's all going to be all right. We will walk and worship ever, all the happy golden days. So they sang on for an hour, and between hymns, Walt Spoon called out the river points and hamlets as they passed them. Well, that's Sunfish yonder, folks. Over there is Petticoat Ripple. Yonder is Grape and Bat Island. I think we're passing now Sisterville already, I declare. Mother, this little boat makes right fair time, don't she?
Above them, the chattering puffing of the steam engine and the occasional shrill scream of the whistle left stuttering echoes among the environing hills and set yard dogs bawling and howling in the bottom farms along the shore. The air was unbelievably rich and sweet with the temper of the season. The river smelled like the incense of some primal pagan fertility. "Well, why are you so still, boy?" John lifted his eyes at the question. Beyond the fingers, beyond the dead gravy vest and the stiff paper collar and the black tie, he shrugged swiftly as small boys do, and then grinned, the perfect picture of a fool. "I figure a boy like you would be mixed excited taking a ride on a real steamboat." Still he said nothing in reply. "John, I don't believe you like me very much." He could not make the lie with his mouth, and so he had sat mute and blushing. Willa chat happily with Icy Spoon and Nellie Bloyd, did not overhear Preacher talking to the boy, and Pearl was dreaming, her eyes lost in the magic mirror of the passing river, the doll's face pressed close against her pink bonnet brim. "Oh, have a heart, boy. I think you made up your mind not to like me from the first." And John thought, when I walked on the tall fence in Jason Lindsay's meadow, that time I walked with my feet going very carefully so that I wouldn't fall. That is how I must make myself but be right now when he's looking at me. Boy, what?" He lifted his gaze now and met Preacher's eyes steadily. Was there something quite calm and deadly in those eyes? The glitter, not of ice, but of chilled blue steel. "Perhaps you better start trying to like me," smiled Preacher ominously. He paused a moment, letting the words sink in before he went on. "Because your mama likes me, John." John clenched his teeth until his spittle tasted like pennies under the tongue. "And your dear little sister Pearl likes me," Preacher went on, with a mocking, cajoling warmth. "And if both of them like me and you don't, why, then that makes you different, John. Now, don't you think you might try to like me just a little? You don't want to be different, do you? No? Yes?" He thought, because when you tell a lie, it must be to keep from saying a worse thing. Then lying is not a sin, and God will not punish you. But what if God is one of them? And that's the boy. "There you go, Boom Preacher. Did you hear that? Willa, my girl." He turned and pressed his hand gently upon her shoulder so that she turned laughing in mid-sentence. "Pardon?" "John," cried Preacher, "he says he likes me." Icy intervened, her face flushed and kittenish. "Why, of course he likes you, Mr. Powell," she cried. "He's such a fine boy. He loves all his elders, don't you, John?" Now the boat whistle blew 3 shrill blasts, and they moved from the channel towards the groves of trees on the West Virginia shore, where in those pale, sweet, rich shone the white spire of a country church, and among the fences the pale stones of the burying ground. We're here! We're here!" cried Willa with a child's happiness, and John sprang suddenly to her side, clasping her hand, having thought in one sudden wonderful moment that she had cried, "He's here! He's here! It's Dad!" The picnic joy washed from her eyes for that moment, and the smile faded on her mouth. "John, how could you be that mean to mention his name to me today?" But I thought you said." He stumbled away from her, foolish and clumsy among the braces and chairs and the steam and the stirring, stiff legs of the standing people, and he kept thinking over and over, "Because if I cry, then they will know something is wrong, and they will guess that I know something, that I would die before I would tell any of them." Then the little boat scraped on the brick landing. The green and fair wind blew, and up in the meadow behind the grove the little country church woke suddenly, as if in greeting, and began striking soft golden notes of April sound. They spent the morning solemnly trimming the grass on the little mounds of earth and wrenching winter weeds away from the carved names of the foolish sandstone angels and the little inlaid enamel pictures above the lost and faded dates. They set jelly glasses of Johnny jumps up the headstones and carried little pails of water from the faucet to the edge of the grove. The wind blew gently all the morning, and white clouds glided slowly across the blue sky like strange, grand frigates, and so until night there was no other sound but the snip-snip of grass scissors and the hushing sighs of sickles and occasionally scratching cry of spring birds soaring in restive and feral joy into an untroubled sky. They ate very late in the afternoon. John had carried his share of water pails and stood by the unmarked grave of his father while Willa wept and Pearl stood beside her hugging the old doll until the older ones walked away again, and then she began to question again. "John?" "Yes." "Where's Dad?" "I don't know," he said truthfully, and willfully intervened then with thick sandwiches for each of them, ham salad between thick slices of salt, rising bread fresh that morning from Icy's oven. John watched them eat, but held his own sandwich untouched, still warm and unyielding within the wax paper. He returned to his father's grave and stood for a moment perplexed and scowling at the fresh earth. "Listen here now," he began clumsily, and then abandoned it because it was just a pile of dirt, and he had been foolish enough for a moment to think that it was really him there, and that maybe he could have made his dad say that it really didn't matter, that it was all right to tell them after all because it was more than he would be able to endure, holding it all inside. Then suddenly he could not believe that anyone alive or dead could be there no matter what the older people said, or that any of it had any reality at all. The square, eroded slabs with the little names, the numbers, the pictures of the sad smiling ladies, and the little dimpled stone babies. These were the great stone toys of a giant who had grown weary of his play, wandered away long ago. It was a joke of some kind. It was just letters, like the letters on preachers' fingers. "John, are you sick?" she said. "No, Mom." "Then why don't you eat your sandwich?" "Not hungry, Mom." "Well, now, I don't want you pestering me going home on the boat this evening. There's not be a drop of food to eat then." He unwrapped his big sandwich slowly, regarded it with faint distaste an instant, and then dutifully bit into it. He did not like the smell of icy salt rising bread. It had a sour smell, like when someone is sick, but he ate, chewing the hunks of sandwich in his dry mouth. "Ah, here's my boy." His mouth stopped chewing, then began again. He swallowed it in dry agony. "How about a bite out of that sandwich, boy?" Chad said nothing, heard nothing but the vast and enormous clanking of the watch in Preacher's pocket, the gold watch of his dad's that Willa had given him. "Oh, have a heart, boy," whined the voice, and the hand named Love reached out for the sandwich. John looked at the fingers and the blue letters of false love and thought, which is more dangerous? Which is worse? When he is joking like this, or when his eyes turn blue like the steel of the pistols in the hands of the men by the smokehouse that day? He held the sandwich out. "Tut, tut, boy, I don't want your sandwich. That was just a little joke." John turned suddenly, threw the sandwich into the rank winter grass, and moved off again. After a bit, he found an Indian arrowhead in the earthy sand, and brushed it clean and polished it, and felt curiously safer with it in his pocket. And then he saw them on a wood bench on the roadside, his mother and the preacher. The others had gone off, flushed and giggly, knowing how it was with lovers, letting them be alone. John looked at his mother's face, flushed and glowing the way it had used to be when Ben Harper came home from work and kissed her in the door. After a bit, Willa called to him and stood up, smoothing her skirts. She had seen the others moving again towards the landing with the baskets and garden tools. "Come along, boy, we're leaving." On the boat again, He saw that it was nearly dark, and there were black clouds over the Ohio hills, and the faint grumble of thunder, like a dog growling under a porch, and he suddenly thought that he had forgotten something, felt something as if there were still a question he should ask the man under the mound. But then he remembered again, and there was no one really there. Why are you afraid? He asked himself. Because of the rain, he told himself. Because of the lightning and the thunder. No, he answered himself, that's not why I'm afraid. In mid-channel, above the bend of the river at Pathum City, a swift and violent spring storm had overtaken them. Night had fallen as swiftly as the door slammed by the wind. Then in an instant the river was lit by vast sheets of lightning like falling shivers of broken glass, and the green water was lashed and riven by the mountain winds. The little river packet tossed and groaned in the passion of a torrential fury. John made no sound, holding Pearl's hand tightly by his mother's side. Now everyone just keep calm and collected. Walt Spoon was calling above the roar of the wind and the rain. We'll be home in our parlors inside in about 20 minutes. In the shelter of the boilers, they were protected from the tempest and the great gusts of rain that raced like sheepdogs across the torn, ragged waters of the river. John kept his eyes on the rough boards on the deck beneath him. Thunder boomed and echoed between the high hills in a giant and unremitting cannonade. Lightning flashed and shivered on the black, reflecting waters. Now Preacher stepped into the midst of them and held up his hands. Brothers and sisters, the Lord is watching over us, but just the same, I think we might keep our spirits up in the presence of his almighty wrath with a little hymn singing. Well, yes, that's such a fine idea, Preacher. And Preacher commenced the singing, stamping his foot in a fierce, heavy rhythm on the boards of the little band began singing, their voices lost and wandering among the high, keen shrills of the river wind and the bombardment of the thunder. John squeezed Pearl's hand and glanced sidelong at the doll in her arms. It was safe, close against her heart. Its vacuous plasters stared unmoved by any terror such as theirs. Brightly beaming our Father of mercy from his lighthouse evermore. But to us he gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. John felt Preacher against him and turned his eyes to the fingers on his shoulders and saw the one name, H-A. Why aren't you singing, John? The hot breath was whispering against his face and the bad smell against his lip. He said nothing. Dark the night of sin has settled, loud and angry billows roar. Eager eyes are watching, longing for the light along the shore. Well, why aren't you singing, boy? Now a single flame of lightning rent the river into a blinding sheet, and while the night strained and creaked under the enormous blast of sound, John lifted his eyes, and in another flash saw the face of the man, glittering with rain and twisted with the fury of the storm itself. Why aren't you singing, boy? Trying not to make the harbor in the darkness may be lost. The fingers were tightening like the steel pinchers of a tool into his soft flesh of the boy's shoulder. He tried to wrench free, but the grip went under the tendons, around the shoulder bone. Sing, boy, sing, came the hot and furious whisper in his eyes. God damn you, sing to him. I don't know the words, John cried out suddenly, and the finger sprang free. I don't know the words. He wailed it and flung himself into the soft-scented vastness of Willow's petticoats, buried his face deep in the sweet lavender-fragrant clothing against the warm thigh, and trembled violently, not crying because he would have to lean and learn again some day how to cry at Willow's thoughts. It was the wind, the darkened thunder, and the rain that had done him in, make him scream, throw himself trembling against her. Breathe, just breathe. I don't know the words, he stuttered again in the muffling calico. But the thunder was so loud, and Preacher's singing was so loud that no one heard what he was saying. In the Ohio Valley, it is the river that gives and takes the season. It is that mighty stream where the vast alluvial artery of the land itself that when the town grows weary of snows and harsh fogs, the great heart pumps green spring blood down the river, and the banks are warmed and nourished by it, and soon the whole environ earth blossoms despite itself, and the air comes alive, and the lambs caper and bleat upon the hillside paths. And so now it was a prime of spring in the bottomlands. Soon the red-bound hound would celt in the creek's hollow on nights when the moon was and curls of golden hair against the shoulders of the Ohio hills. Soon the shantyboat people would join their fiddle and mouth-harp racket to the chorus of green frogs down under the mist of the moonlight willows. And the morning the showboat Humpty Dumpty had put in on the landing. And if this urgent season of mating Willa found the attention of Preacher attractive and exciting, to Icy Spoon they were challenging imperative. She was roused to a perfect fury of determination to make a match between these two. It seemed to the old woman that to instrument such a union would vindicate something lost in the dust of her own old, youthful, half-forgotten yearnings. Preacher was a man of God. Any woman should be proud to marry a man of God. The ideal aspect to this was that he had none of the sex, none of the nastiness, which for her marriage had always been tainted. And so she persisted night and day, pressing Willa upon this prince of men. Even Walt grew tired of it after a while, and would wander down to the grocery store to gossip and spit and whittle and be away from the smell of women, which sometimes grew thick in his home. Willa waited in warm awareness, biding her time, while Icy kept on this kind and ferocious schoolgirl's energies. It's not be forever, my fine missy. That's man that will wait around for a widow to make up her mind. You're not the old fish in the river, my proud girl. Oh, I know, Icy. I just don't know what to say. Say yes, that's all. How many times is he going to ask you now? Twice? Forevermore? And you ain't said, I swear, Willow, if you ain't cautioned. They sat behind the marble counter that night, the gold blooms of the twin gas lamps flowering soft in the air above the heads, the whine of the Victrola somewhere off down the leafy street. Willa shook her head, eyes shut, as if she were trying to shake loose some key through thoughts among her. If I was only sure it would turn out, Icy. A husband, grunted Icy, is one piece of store goods you never know till you take it home and get the paper off. I know, that's why. No, listen, but if ever I seen a sure bargain, cried Icy, Mr. Powell's a good Christian gentleman. Yes, Icy, but the boy... John, well, if you care for my opinion, what that boy needs is a switch, and a little more often. He's grown just a little too big for his britches, missy. Yes, I know that, but something happened on the picnic that day. The storm? Something more than that. Something between him and Mr. Powell. He won't tell. Get in the habit of calling him Harry, honey. Men like to hear a woman say their Christian name. I didn't say anything about it to Harry, of course. Well, maybe it was just seeing the father's grave and all, said Icy. Youngsters find it so hard to understand that the flesh is really there, under the stone. Willa shivered and stared at the spring night outside, the street lamp glowing behind the canopy of young Singapore leaves in the misty green halo. And John, I don't think he believes that about the money, that Ben throated in the river. Well, nonsense. Mr. Powell wouldn't have lied. Well, he's a man of God, Willa. Did you explain to the boy? Yes, I told John yesterday, and then I made him come to the parlor and stand by the chair while Mr. Powell, while Harry told him. And what did he say to that? Nothing. Without warning, that still night was full of piping notes on the calliope of the showboat down at the landing. Well, my, hear that, honey, cried old Icy. A body don't hear that sound every month of the year. That sound that says it's spring. Yes, sighed Willa, it's spring. I ain't caution how such a noisy thing that can get your bones and make you wake it, kick it up and frolic. Well, yes, I reckon, Icy. Honey, what's wrong? Willa plunged her naked arm into the blue dishwasher and brought out dripping ice cream dishes.
I don't think John believed Mr. Powell, she said. Well, honey, don't you believe him? That's the important thing after all. Yes, I suppose. I just can't imagine why Ben wouldn't have told me those days when I went to see him at the prison, pled with him. Honey, because Ben Harper was a good man, said Icy. That's why. He knows that money was nothing but sin and torment and an abomination of God. And I reckon he thought he'd test you, let you think it was still somewhere hid. Hoping at last you say you didn't want it anymore and that they maybe he free it up for you. And you be free of it too. Maybe you just failed Ben, Willa. And maybe this is your chance to make it all up to him. Ah, Icy, I know. I never doubt really what Harry says is true. Willa stared for a moment in her dripping hands and then pushed a lock of hair back with the heel of her hand and turned her anguished eye to the old woman. Icy, what shall I do? Well, darling, marry him. But I don't feel anything, Icy. It ain't like Ben and me that summer. Fiddledy-sticks. That wasn't love, honey. That was just hot britches. There's more to a marriage than 4 bare legs in a bed. When you're married 40 years, you'll know that all, and it doesn't matter a hill of beans. I've been married that long to my Walt now, and I'll swear it's all the time whenever he took me, I just lie there thinking about my cannon, or how I managed to get on with the boys' new shoes for school. Well, that's another thing, sighed Willa. I kept the boy John out of school all last winter till the trouble was over. I just couldn't bear what they had to put up with from them other kids, mean, nasty songs and horrible pictures on that fence. A woman, as it continued, Helis is a fool to marry for that, because it's all just fake and a pipe dream to start with. It's something for a man. The good Lord never meant for a decent woman to want that, not really want it. Next winter, Will said, if I marry Mr. Powell, I send them both back to school. They seem more respectful somehow. Psst. What? Yonder he comes. Mr. Powell on his way here. Oh, yes, oh, yes. Do I look all right, Icy? Honey, you're so pretty as a picture. Well, that's good, Icy, she breathed wildly, because... Did ya? Have you decided, will ya? Yes, oh, yes, Icy. If he asks me again tonight, I'll say yes. Icy scampered off to the kitchen, purple with excitement, and presently Willa and the preacher were alone at the table by the window. Cocoa tonight? No, my child, I've eaten a smidgen of food all day. Goodness, are you sick? Oh, yes, no. He rested his elbows on the table and fixed her with his burning eyes. Willa, I can't sleep night till you say yes, he murmured, reaching for her hand, still damp from the dishwasher. It's just as if the Lord keeps whispering in my ear. This is the woman for you, Harry Powell. He paused for an instant. Have you thought about it, Willa? Yes. She breathed scarlet with her emotions. I have. You got an answer for me? Harry, I'll marry you, she stammered. If only what, my dear? She sought to form the answer, but it was too vague, too lost. She did not know herself whose voice this was, deep in the vast river, murmurs of her mind, that kept telling her not to do this thing. Something, the figure of a man, wandered in and out among the trees of her consciousness through the white, blurred fog upon her mind's shore. Now it was the shape of a lover, and now something else, something frightful beyond telling, something with the body of a child in its arms. Old Uncle Bertie took the quid of tobacco out of his mouth long enough to gulp down another choking throatful of the corn liquor in the tin cup. John squatted on the threshold of the wharf boat cabin, watching him with a faint, admiring smile. The night air was shrill with the enormous racket of the showboat Calliope a few feet above them. I can't hear ye, boy. I said, did you fix Dad's skiff yet? The skiff? Daggone it, Johnny. I've had such a misery in my hip these past couple of days I barely stirred from the boat. Next week now, I promise. We'll go fishing first day of June if it ain't too sunny. John sighed. Well, how's your ma? Oh, she's all right. Well, how's your sister Pearl? What? Oh, Pearl. Yeah, Pearl. John nodded with a grown-up authority. Just fine.
He ducked his head outside the door again and stared again in consuming wonder at the blasted glory of the showboat. She was little more than an enormous barn built on a raft with a stern wheeler to tow her, and yet she was a miracle from stem to stern, strung with blazing electric lights and glittering white paint. Half the county had come to Crespit Landing that night to see her and pay their quarters and go on board to view the show. John, of course, had no quarter, and so he had contented himself with the prospect of half an hour's chat with Uncle Bertie, and then stole glances at the wonderful boat here within staggering earshot of her piping calliope. He had disobeyed Willa again coming here, and he had, with much greater misgivings, left Pearl in bed alone, and it was this later which itched his conscience until inevitably he got the better of him, and so at last he rose and lifted his hand in farewell to the old man. "Leaving, boy?" "Yep, gotta watch out for Pearl, Uncle Bertie." "Well, good night, boy. Come again any time. And mind now, I'll have your pa's skiff in ship shape inside a week." John skipped up the plank and onto the bridge of the landing, already slick with evening mists. The waterfront was lined with buggies and old Model Ts, with ditch mud splattered clear to the windows. Country girls and their boys, and the old folks lined the shore with their hands holding their money till the calliope stopped playing. Then they would go down and give Mr. Bryant their money and go inside for the show. John sighed and moved away along the tree-shaded darkness of Peacock Alley. He was wild with misgivings now about having left Pearl alone in the house. She was his trust. He pledged this to Ben, and he hurried for the river road. To the voice of the calliope fell to a thin, faint chatter high in the spring night. Passing Spoons, he spied his mother and Icy at the fountain, and Icy was fairly dancing a jig and hugging Willa and kissing her cheek, and he moved on past, shaking his head, wondering what they were up to now, thinking that he would never understand the way of a woman. He hurried more, knowing that it was past 10 and he did not want his mother to overtake him on her way home from work. The house loomed silent in the faint shine of the young spring moon. The light of the gas lamp in the yard lit like the peppering of new growth of the oak tree, and he saw the lamp of the parlor window was lit. He could not remember it had been lit when he left, and that made him frightened, because he was sure Willa would not have left it burning. "Is someone there?" he said to the house as he tiptoed up the steps. By the river, under the fog, the green frogs chanted their unearthly, unending litany of love. "Is anybody there?" But there was no reply, no sound, and he opened the screen door and closed it softly and stepped into the shadowed hallway. He knew almost at once that Preacher was there, or had been there not an instant before, because there was Preacher smell in the silent air, and it was the smell of dread in his nose, and a dog-like his flesh gathered and bunched at the scent of it. "Is anybody here?" "Good evening, John." So he had been standing there all along by the hall rack, where Ben Harper used to hang his cap when he came in from the car of the evening. Preacher standing there all alone, letting him be scared, letting him call 3 times before he answered. Now Preacher moved forward, and the light from the open doorway to the parlor threw a golden bar of light across the livid line of lip and cheek and bone beneath the one eye shone like a dark, wet grape. The lid crinkled over it nervously. "Does your mother know you go wandering alone at night, John?" "No." "She said," but there was no way to explain, no excuse, no escape, and then he felt the anger rising, choking his throat, and he thought, what right has he got? "Your little sister Pearl is asleep then?" "Yes." "Good, John." Now he was in a congenial, cajoling mood, and John knew suddenly that he liked this mood less than the other, the dangerous mood, because you never knew what was going on behind that coaxing, squinting eye and that thin smile. "I have something to talk about with you, John." "Well," he sighed, "I reckon I ought to be getting up to bed if you don't mind." "Really, my lad, you weren't worrying about bed when you sneaked off to the wharf to waste your time with that evil old man." And this had John dead to rights, and so he sat down on a straight-backed chair by the door and wished for the sound of Willow's footfall on the tambark outside, because he was getting scared again like he had been the night on the steamboat. Then he heard the scrape of another chair as Preacher sat opposite him and laid a cold finger on his hand. "I had a little talk with your mother tonight, John." John thought, why don't he take me into the parlor to talk where there's light instead of out here in the dark hallway, where I can't watch his face while he says, and he knows whether what he is saying is real or not. "We talked it over, John, and your mother decided it might be best for me to let you know the news." "What news? What?" "Your mother told me tonight she wanted me to be your daddy to you and your sister. We're going to get married, boy." He thought, this is why it is all dark out here, because it is asleep, and I'm having a bad dream because I rolled over Pearl's doll, and it hurt my stomach, and when I wake up, I will see the light on the wall where the tree branches dance, and then I will turn over, and it won't hurt anymore. "Did you hear what I say, boy?" "Oh, what?" Your mother and I. Did you hear what I said?" He thought, she wouldn't do this to Dad because he loved all of us, and because if she does it, he will come back and kill her because he isn't really in that mound. "Married," Preacher Voice went on triumphantly. "We have decided to go to Sisterville tomorrow and have a very simple wedding, and when we come back—" "You ain't my dad," breathed John. "You won't never be my dad." He was not scared anymore. His anger swung and blazed in the dark room like a pine torch. "And when we come back," shrilled Preacher, "we're all going to live here together in this little house as we's friends and share our fortunes together, John." Afterwards, John could not believe he could ever have said such a foolish thing that he said next. At night, remembering, and weeks later, he would sweat and clench his hands till the soft nails bit into the palms, and the lips in the tossing face would deny it in the dark, to the dancing figures on the golden square, to the lashing winds and the river night. But it was true. He had said it. "You think you can make me tell—" He had screamed till the house was shrill with it. "But I won't! I won't! I won't!" And then he hunched and gawked at his own folly, and the fingers of his left hand cupped over his gasped mouth. His fingers tasted of the river, of the tar from the wharf boat, and his heart crying out like a dry voice of dread. "Oh, I should never have said that. Now he will guess. Now he will know. Oh, God, please don't let him know. Oh, God, please don't let him know." "Tell me what, boy?" said Preacher softly. And though the face had moved out of the bar of light again, John knew the head was caught and the mouth smiling. "Oh, nothing." "Are we keeping secrets from one another, little lad?" No, not really." Now the vast dark figure straightened and relaxed, chuckling softly. "No matter, boy. We got a long time together." He held out the hand called love, but John did not move. "Will you shake my hand, boy? Will you wish me happiness with your mother?" John whirled then and raced helter-skelter up the creaking stairway to the bed where he had belonged all along, and he knew God had done all these things to him to punish him for being bad and leaving Pearl alone. He was crouching by her sleeping face and listened to the house. He knew Preacher had not left, that he would be standing there still in the hall by the coat rack, stunned with anger and affront. But while John tore his clothes from his aching body, he heard the fall of the door at last, and then the footsteps going down to the lane. Preacher was gone, and yet he must be certain, and so he stole to the window and spied the lonely figure moving into the mist towards Crespus Landing. Once the figure paused and looked back, but John could not see the face, could not know what fury rested there, on what black resolution already stirred in the clenched hands, named hate. John curled up in the darkness beneath the quilt and embraced the warm body by the sleeping Pearl, while his hand sought and looked for the doll's face, and his fingers traced the shape of one staring plaster eye over and over in senseless terror. "Tonight," chuckled I as he patted John's head, "you and your sister are going to sleep here with me and Mr. Spoon." "Where's Mom, John?" said Pearl. Icy caught the little girl up and plumped her on her ample lap and patted a chubby knee. Your ma has went to Sisterville, she said, with Mr. Powell. Why? Well, to get married is why. Ain't that nice, honey? Just think. Against she gets back tomorrow, you'll have a brand new daddy. Wait, is Dad coming home? John wandered away from them, stood staring out through the sparkling, spotless window of ice cream parlor into the deserted Peacock Alley. He did not like Icy or Walt. They were part of it. They had helped fashion the nightmare. He had known their part in it since the day of the boat. The ice cream parlor smelled like milk and licorice and burnt almonds. Although the hazy spring afternoon he wandered among the wire chairs and the tables, gazing with numb, hungerless curiosity at the little trays of candies in the belly glass cases. Pearl sat in the window by the sleeping tortoise shell cat and played a little game of house with the doll Jenny. At supper time, John took his place wordlessly as the alien board and ate glumly, answered when spoken to, eyes downcast to the strange plate with its seasoning that was just different from his mom's to sicken his heart. More applesauce, John? Smiled Walt Spoon kindly. No, thank you. Goodness, boy, you ain't hardly anything. Your sister has licked her clean twice. You ain't gonna let a girl beat you at eating, are you? I ate some, he said. By Granny Icy, I think this boy could do with a little sulphur and molasses. Have you had your spring tonic this spring, boy? No. Walt had counted on the frightening the boy into eating, but nothing changed him. Nothing stirred the sullen lackluster eyes that shone dully with the suffering that none of them could ever understand. Icy held her peace till after the Italian cream was finished. Then she began. John? Yes, ma'am. You got no cause to act up this way about your mother marrying Mr. Powell. He freed the napkin slowly from his collar. I declare I think a boy like you would be proud getting a fine stepfather like Mr. Powell. She fixed him with her shrewishness and unwavering scrutiny, searching for some effect of these remarks. I reckon you'd be happy if your ma was going to marry Uncle Bertie Step-to. He kept his eyes lowered, waiting till she was done, knowing it was part of his lot to endure this, too. Pearl had scrambled down from her chair and, dragging the doll Jenny off to the ice cream parlor again to the window, the cat followed, meowing softly, thinking she had brought away some scrap of her supper for him to eat. Icy grunted impatiently and snatched up a pile of plates, bound for the sink. John went out on the back porch and sat down on the worn stoop to stare at the moon that had risen and lay in the orchard trees like a rind of golden fruit. He heard a rain crow purling its soft cry down the lane toward the river. I put fresh sheets and a fresh bolster case on for you, cried Icy. You'll find it just as comfy as your own bed. John stood in his nightshirt waiting for Pearl to precede him into bed. Here, honey, said Icy, marching to Pearl with outstretched arms. I'll take your dolly so you won't roll on it. John's mouth flew open, but it was Pearl who spoke. Oh, no, Miss Jenny always sleeps in bed with me. Oh, nonsense. You'll roll on her in your sleep and hurt yourself, honey. Now, I'll keep good care of the doll for you till morning. No, said John in a faraway voice that did not seem to come from him at all. Pearl always sleeps with her doll, Miss Spoon, ma'am. Icy rolled in glare. Mind your business, youngster. He crawled between the cold sheets, his lips the color of death, trembling even as Icy had agreed to let Pearl keep the doll, and bent to kiss the little girl's cheek. Good night, my little lamb, she whispered, and she kissed John too, but said nothing, and presently turned out the gas lamp and moved to the door. Sleep tight, she whispered, and closed it. And John lay listening as the old couple moved about in the kitchen beneath the bedroom, talking in low voices and drinking coffee and moving out from time to time to serve the few customers that came in after the show. The Victrola whirled and whined in the faintest distances below, and now the corner of the moon gleamed like the prick of a silver knife against the jamb of the window. Pearl stirred, turned the face to him. John? Yes. Where's Mom gone? Oh, go to sleep, Pearl.
No, John, tell me where to get married. To Mr. Powell? Yes. John? What, Pearl? What is it? I'm glad, John. I love Mr. Powell. You little fool, he whispered, but so that she didn't really hear, making the words to himself with his lips and clenching his fist in awful, terrible desperation. I love him lots and lots, John. And John thought, she is with him now. Mom is, and she's on the side, and now Pearl's on his side too, and that makes me completely alone. Now Pearl was sitting upright in bed, and the doll was sitting up too. Its painted eyes stared into the moon with vacuous and stunning idiocy. John, if Mr. Powell is Mom's husband, then I can tell him about... His hand with the swiftness of the copperhead flew up and was pressed into her wet, surprised mouth, and beneath his strong clasp she struggled, whimpering, and began to squeal softly into his fingers. In a moment he took the hand away, yet held it posed, ready to clap down again. You swore, Pearl! John, don't! You swore that day, Pearl. You promised Dad you would never tell. Oh, I wouldn't never tell, John. You know, I wouldn't never tell. He glared into her face, chalk-white and gasping. If ever you do, he whispered furiously, I'll get a big, big giant to come and murder you. Oh, John, no! Yes, a big giant with long, shiny, sticky knives like he's got. Oh, I promise, John. Oh, John, I swear. All right, just remember, do you swear? Yes, because John went on, his eyes in the moon now. I'll ask you someday soon. Mr. Powell? Yes, he'll come and beg you to tell him. Oh, but I won't tell him, John. I won't ever tell him, not even Mr. Powell. She lay back down, breathing heavily with her thoughts, and then, John, who has a big sticker knife? Never mind, go to sleep. He lay thinking. Last Wednesday, when he was out in the garden helping Walt Spoon spread bone meal, he hung his coat on the doorknob, and I poked around in the pocket when he wasn't looking, and there it was. Only I didn't know what until I pressed the little silver button, and it jumped out and shook my hand. I tried to get it close, but it wouldn't work, and so I just stuck it back in the coat pocket, open, and run home, and guess he never was suspicious. It was me, because he never said nothing. Presently he fell asleep, and he was big and strong, and he has a blue gun, and he was pointing it at Preacher, and Preacher was not even scared at all, and John kept shooting the gun, and Preacher was really dead, although he was pretending not to be, and then his mother came into the room and took the gun away from him and said, John, you bad boy, look who you went and shot. And he looked out. Oh, dear God, it wasn't Preacher at all. It was Ben. It was Ben. It was his dad. It was my dad. It's too late because Willa took Ben out and hid him in the mound under the tree where the dart birds sing. Dad. Willa thought he looked so queer with no coat on, with his narrow shoulders and the white shirt and those suspenders and his paper collar on the bureau scarf. She felt warm and loving about him, though, because it made her think how little children men were underneath, how helpless and unpretending in their suspenders and no collars. Outside the little hotel, a radio was blaring from an open restaurant down the street. They had taken a pleasant little room in the brass house, and it was her honeymoon, and she kept thinking as she watched him lay Ben's old watch carefully on the dusty dresser, he's my husband, and I just love him so much. He is not Ben, but I will learn to love him even more because he's a man of God. In a moment she would go down the hallway to the bathroom by the fire escape and put her nice muslin nightgown and come back to him. It could not ever be the way it had been with Ben, those nights in the old lost summer with the roller skates, thundering faintly out in the darkness of the rollerdrome, and the record playing over and over. Lucky Lindy, Lucky Lindy. It could not ever be those nights of those summers. She would make her mind to forget that first hot pulse and gush of Ben's embrace, and she would make it something else, something better, because herself and Harry Powell.
She lifted the old nightdress from the cardboard suitcase and thought, because the old cloth doesn't matter, the cheap torn teddy bears and the ragged stockings and the run-down shoes that I've always had to wear, because I have one nice thing that I gave to Ben, and I will give it to him too, the only nice thing I ever owed. My own body, because it is clean and I am beautiful and not torn or worn out like the clothes. Willa, are you going to get ready for bed? Yes, she said. I was just looking at you, Harry, thinking how handsome and good you are. Hurry along, my dear. We both need our rest. Yes, yes, darling. Of course, Harry. She lifted his coat to hang it up for him, and something thick and heavy in the pocket struck against the door of the clothes press. He did not notice when she put her hand in the pocket with a woman's wondering and took the thing out, staring at it curiously for a moment with a softening of her smile, and then put it quickly back before he could find out. She fetched her washcloth and soap and towel and hairbrush and went off to the bathroom with the smile still on her lips, but twisted with faint puzzlement now. It's kind of a razor, she kept thinking while she waited in the hallway of the little country hotel while a drummer finished in the bathroom, and she listened to the thin, rasping voice of the song on the radio down there in the spring street of the river night. A woman laughed in another room, and glass tinkled, and a man began singing a coarse parody of the radio tune, and the women laughed louder. He was in the bed asleep when she returned. The lights went out. The ragged window blind flapped like the gray wings of a hurt bird beside the bed, and she started back at her pale sister of the mirror, and she stood waiting and wondering if he would call to her. The only pretty thing I ever did own, she thought, my body, because even the muslin nightgown was gray from too many washings, and the feathers on the slippers have withered and clung to one another since the long-ago night when Bed had won them for her in the shooting gallery at the Upshur County Fair. Harry, she called softly. He was snoring lightly, and the window blind flapped. Fix that window, he said suddenly in a clear, wide-awake voice, as if sleep and wake were no different to him, as if it should move swiftly from the world of dreams into the world of the wake, with no break in the sound, track consciousness, with only a flutter of his thin lids. She rolled the blind all the way up, thinking, he was pretending to be asleep. He was just pretending to snore. This is because he's embarrassed. She slipped between the sheets, fresh and sweet from some country widow's wash line, and lay for a moment listening to the radio down in the town and her own heart thundering, and then she turned on her side and stared at the back of his head. She could hear his lips moving in the darkness with a small rapid sound like the feet of mice. Harry, he stirred impatiently. I was praying, he said. Oh, I'm sorry, Harry. I didn't know. I thought maybe... He turned subtly, and although she could not see his face on the pillow, she could feel the anger in it. You thought, Willa, that the minute you walked in that door, I start to paw at you and feeling you in the disgusting, abominable way men are supposed to do on their wedding nights. Eh? Ain't that right now? No, Harry, I thought... That's the kind of thing that make jokes about in those filthy burlesque houses downriver at Louisville and Cincinnati. Oh, yes, I witnessed them with my own eyes. I made myself go, Willa, just so I could witness with my own eyes the degradation and stink into which mortal men and women can fall. Her eyes widened in the pitch darkness of his looming face until they burned and her mouth grew dry as his words lashed her. I think it's time we got something perfectly clear, Willa. Are you listening? Yes, she moaned. Marriage to me represents a blending of two spirits in the sight of Almighty God. I reckon it's time I made that clear, Willa. She shut her eyes, hating herself for the shame and dirtiness and hurt she felt now, and she prayed that he would stop, but somehow she knew that he had just begun. Somehow he seemed to have roused himself to a sermon pitch and suddenly got out of bed and stood in the yellow light which the window cast into the cheap room, his thin, weary arms moving stiffly in the sleeves of his nightshirt.
How are they any better, he said, than the whore of Babylon? She buried her mouth in the pillow and smothered a moan of the thickness in between her teeth. Get out of bed, Willa, he commanded, not violently, but with a dangerous edge of anger still in his voice, while with one arm he pulled the window blind clear to the sill. Now he moved across the room, his dry, naked feet whispering on the board, and snapped the light on. It flooded the room with an uncharitable yellow glare, and a faint singing commenced in the golden bulb. Get out of bed, Willa. She obeyed. Harry, what? Take off your nightdress. Harry. Do as I say, Willa. She obeyed with sick, trembling hands and stood at last, naked and blushing before him. Now go and look at yourself yonder in that mirror. Harry, please, do as I say. She felt her feet moving, felt the grain of the cold boards under her soles, and then the thin, worn nap of the square of the carpet of the bureau. Look at your body in the mirror, Willa. She made her eyes travel the miles upward and stared into the brown mirror, streaked and stained like the surface of some condemned and poisonous pool. She saw her breasts, still pretty and young and firm, and the shoulders that Ben had used to kiss when she wore her bathing suit to the river. What do you see, girl? She could see her mouth begin to curl, and the vision went blurry, then in burning yellow washes of tears. You see the body of a woman, he cried, the temple of creation and motherhood. You see the flesh of Eve, the man since Adam had profaned and filthied, and made into the vessel for the corruption and lust for his own rottenness. He was pacing now, thin and mad, and touchingly absurd in his white nightskirt. Mind you, my girl, I'm not pointing you out as worse than the best. But the body, that body... He pointed to her shivering loins and the dark feathers of her quivering, convulsed belly. That body was meant for begetting children. It was not meant for the whore and lust of whoring men. That's filthiness. I say the filthiness and the devil's business. Yes, that's filthiness. The devil's business, my girl. Do you understand that? Yes. Do you want more children? Well, no. No, of course you don't. It's the business of our marriage to mind those two you have now, not to beget any more. And if not to beget more, then why should we soil our bodies with sex and rottenness? Ain't that talking sense, my girl? Ain't that the way the Lord wants it? Yes. He stood staring at her a moment longer, his head cocked a little to one side, and the curious remoteness wandered in his eyes again, his face twitching a little as if he were straining to hear, to listen to a faint, far counsel from heaven. Now you can get back in your nightdress now, and stop shivering. She felt the gown fall over her hair and shoulders and crawled back into bed, sick and drained of feeling. While he touched off the light and let the window blind up again, he stood for a moment by the side of the ancient brass bed, with the street light touching his profile of flesh and cheekbones with a thin line of gold. I'm sorry. She shaped the words soundlessly with her lips, waiting for him to get into the bed and watch him at last crawl stiffly under the sheets again and turn his back to her again and listen to the dry, faint breath of his swift whisper prayed running and endless in a reel of a film of an unillumined movie projector. She lay on her back, staring at the dark stain on the ceiling, and thought to herself, he is right. But just the same, it's queer that he would know he's right, because he has never had a woman ever in all his life. He is right, though. It is rottenness, all of it. I'll ask Jesus to help me get clean and purified of those thoughts, so I can be what Harry wants me to be. He's right. I mustn't never want that again, because it's what he says, a sin and an abomination. Even with Ben and me did it. It was not that maybe God's punishing him and me for it now. Ben. And just before she fell asleep, she heard another sound and thought, well, I must be wrong. He wouldn't be doing that. But
But it was so. He was crying softly in his sleep like a child, and all she could do was lie there in agony of fear, not able to touch him in any way, not able to reach over into the strange land of dreams' death and save him, not able to do anything at all, but soundlessly shape the words against the wrath of God's anger and God's mercy there in the dark room of the little country hotel. "Good night, Harry. Good night." But they were lost beyond recall, beyond answering, borne on the winds above the meadow. The golden June morning quivered like water in the new leaves of the grape arbor. Pearl squatted with the doll, Jenny, and the doll was Willa now, and the tomato stack and the rag wrapped around it. That was Mr. Powell. Pearl stood them near by side again the bricks and the bottom of the arbor and sang a song because Willa and Mr. Powell were married and they had returned from their honeycomb. Now the scissors from the pantry flashed in her fingers, and she cut out the green pieces of paper faces. These were the two children, and she was a patient mother, because when the wind blew, those mischievous children would try to run away. "Now, Willa, you must make me my supper, for I get very hungry." "Yes, Mr. Powell. Right away, Mr. Powell." "And what about our two great children, Pearl and John?" "Well, you can make Pearl some supper, Willa." "But John is bad. But John to bed without his supper." "Oh, no, I can't do that, Mr. Powell. John is hungry, too." Well, well, if he promises to be very good and stops being so bad." Pearl tucked the jagged bits of paper tight between the bricks at the feet of the doll named Willa and the stick named Mr. Powell. In the kitchen, she could hear her mother rattling pots and plates for supper time. "Now," cried Pearl when she had fed her family, "now it's beddy time. Off to go, children. Go to beddy bye." But suddenly the errant wind swept fitfully through the vines. John and Pearl fluttered away from the child's helpless fingers, sailed and drifted high over the buttercups, into the sky, over the sun. "Come back, you bad children," wailed Pearl. "Come on back." "We shall bow our heads in grace." John waited till Pearl's eyes were closed, and then he lowered his shaggy head over his plate of ham and hominy and shut his eyes. The light shone distant and red through the quivering lids, and he waited, mouth-watering, at the rich incensive dish of watermelon preserves tickled his nose. Preacher's Grace rolled on an interminable catalogue, on, and at last his voice rose to conclusion. "Though we live under the curse of Cain, Almighty God, we turn our backs against the temptation of the mortal flesh. Bless this good food, O Lord Almighty, and let it build up the strength to fight the devil's fiendish persuasions and the temptations of sex and gold and the lust. Amen. Pass the bread, please, boy." Willow kept her eyes on her plate throughout most of the meal. She ate very little, perhaps more than any of them, but John saw the change that had come over her since Preacher had entered the family. Her eyes bore dark shadows, and her mouth was thinner, paler. Her flesh itself seemed to have capitulated to an urgent moral protocols of her marriage until the very roundness of her sweet figure had turned sour and lean, emaciated. Still, in a curious way, she seemed happier in this strange union with the preacher than she had ever been with Ben Harper. Something new had come into her life. Willa had discovered sin. It seemed somehow that the discovery was something that she had sought and hungered after all her life. She talked about sin constantly to John, and although Pearl understood only that sin was being bad, she was pleased to sit and hear Willa out when the sermonizing mood was upon her. Willa kept after them ceaselessly each night, and they prayed on their knees, and they kept praying. They prayed on the naked floorboards. Preacher's spring revival meeting in the tent down at the river at Welcome had brought them enough money to live on through the summer. These meetings had been highlighted by Willa's own impassioned testimony, and her shrill, fevered voice had risen above the cries of the more penitent sinners in the valley. "You have all suffered," she cried out one night, her eyes burning in the torchlight, her face blanched and bloodless with the thrill of her vision. "And you have all sinned. But which one of you can say, as I can say, I drove a good man to lust and murder and robbery because I kept a hounding him and a pestering him night and day for pretty clothes and those perfumes and face paint. And do you know what I wanted? Them things. I just wanted them so he would lust after my body more and more instead of thinking about the salvation of his soul and the souls of them 2 kids down yonder. And finally he couldn't stand it no more, and he went out and took a gun and he slew, yes, he slew 2 human beings and stole their money and come home with it to give it to me and said, 'Here, you whore of Babylon, take this money that is tainted with the blood of Abel and go to the store to buy you pretty dresses and perfumes and paint.' But brethren, that's where the Lord stepped in. That's where Jesus stepped in." "Yes," cried Preacher, rolling his head gently till the paper collar bit on his neck. "Yes." "Yes," panted Willa, her voice rising to hoarseness to a scream. "The Lord come down out of the sky and stood by the smokehouse that day and took that money, and that money would just drive his poor weak whore of a wife to hell, headlong. Yes, panted the sinners, and saved under the tent, under the torches. And then the 2 kids would get dragged along to hell too, headlong. Yes. And their almighty souls would burn in the hellfire too. Yes. And the Lord told them poor bloody-handed man to take that rotten money, that devil's money, that bloody gold of greed and murder. Yes. Praise the Lord. The money that dripped with the blood of a murdered man, of 2 murdered men. Yes. The Lord said, take it and throw it in the river yonder, brother. Wrap it round the stone and throw it in the old Ohio River, and let's get washed and clean it down into the Mississippi, for it's better there by your neck with the stone tied on it thrown into the bottom of the river than to let one of those little ones go astray. Well, yes, praise Jesus. Hallelujah. Praise Jesus. Throw that money in the river, Amen. And let it wash out into the ocean where the fish can look at it, because the fish have got more sense than sometimes than any man. Yes, oh yes, Sister Powell, praise God. And then the Lord told that man to give himself into the hands of the law and let justice be done. Well, amen, praise Jesus. And after justice had been done to Ben Harper, the Lord made me suffer along like Moses and suffered in the wilderness. Praise God. And then he let Brother Powell to me and said, salvation cometh. Amen. And the Lord bent down and said to me, marry this man and go forth with him and preach God's word. Well, amen. And then someone began to lead the singing when the mist had rolled away. And they sang for nearly half an hour until the whole bottle lamps echoed with their voices under the headlights of Ben Harper's old Model T, and the night preachers counted out the collection and told Willa it had been one of their best. It was close to $35, 2 bushels of wine saps, and half a gallon jug of maple syrup. Somewhere, Preacher always managed to find John alone in the house after supper. Now he stood behind him at the cellar door, and because Preacher was standing in the way, it was impossible to walk down the hallway to the stairs and go up to bed. Willa had gone to Crespit's Landing to visit after supper with Icy and Walt. Pearl was still playing with her doll family under the great arbor. Because Preacher was saying, and his manner had long since stopped being wheedling and pleasant, because sooner or later I will find out where it's hid, boy. It's just a matter of time. I don't know. I don't know nothing about what you're talking about. Yes, you do, boy. No, said the boy. I don't. I could thrash you for contradicting me, boy. That's back talk. John thought, I would rather have the thrashing than the questions, because the thrashing hurts quick, and that's over, and the questions keep on going on forever and ever. Amen. Well, boy, no. Where you hid it, boy, he thought. And even she in change now, my mother. I've got to tell her that he has asked me the questions all the time, and she says I am lying, that he's a man of God, but he's not, and I'm making it up because I hate him, and because I'm sick with sin, and because I'm trying to turn her against him. Preacher read his thoughts. Your mother says you tattled on me, boy. She says you told her I asked you where the money was hid. Isn't that so, boy? Yes. That wasn't very nice of you, John. Have a heart, boy. It don't matter, the boy murmured. No, that's right. It don't matter, because it's your word against mine, and it's me she believes. Yes, he thought, because you made her be crazy. She thinks that money's in the river, smiled Preacher. John listened to the tick of the death watch somewhere hidden in the ancient dark woods of the old house. But you and me, we know better, don't we, boy? John pressed his lips tight, listening to the far-off chant of Pearl, making her little home under the grape arbor. Don't we, boy? God damn you! Answer me, you little son of a bitch! I don't know nothing, he said dully. Now he will shut up and go away from me for a while. After he shuts at me and shouts at me again, and he takes a knife out of his pocket to try to scare me. And doing that, he presses the button, and the sharp thing flings out, and he looks at me for a minute, and then he starts paring the big blue thumbnail on his finger without knife, and then he goes away. No matter, Preacher said in an even voice, and the knife dropped back in his pocket. Sooner or later, boy, you'll tell. The summer's still young yet, little lad. He loomed above the boy, the vast dark hull against the light behind him in the hall table, the lamp with the stained glass shade and the silver chain pulled that Ben Harper had given his wife one Christmas. Now you go fetch your sister and put her to bed. The big figure did not move aside for the boy to pass, making him flatten against the damper wallpaper of the passageway to get through. John ran to the kitchen and strained his eyes into the golden river dust. The grape arbor was luminous in the twilight. Its luxuriant leaves possessed strangely for their own rich light at the evening moment. Pearl! He could hear her voice intimate and whispering as she scolded the doll named Willa and the stick named Mr. Powell. Pearl! What, John? Bedtime. Oh, in a minute. No, now, Pearl. I'll tell Ma. All right. He moved down across the grass, already wet with the evening dew, toward the shapes of Pearl's light pinafore, the little tiny moss within the green dark cavern of the cool grape leaves. Come on, Pearl. He could see her face turned up him now, moon-round and pallid with the big eyes like daisy pansies above the tiny mouth. You'll get mad, John, she whispered. I ain't mad, Pearl. Only get on to bed. You'll get awful mad, John. I just done a sin. You what? He could hear her frantic movement at the some task of the damp bricks at his feet. He could hear the crisp rustle of the paper in her frightened hand. Pearl! You ain't! John, don't be mad. Don't be mad. I was just playing with it. I didn't tell no one. His legs turned to water at the thought. The flesh of his neck gathered a quick, choking horror. It's all here, she whispered placatingly, and furiously movement continued. Now the white moon of early summer appeared suddenly from the hills beyond the meadow, and the vast aura of pale, clear light illuminated the sight before the boy's eye. The bricks beneath his feet littered with the green fortune and $100 banknotes that the little girl was frantically gathering together again. Pearl! Oh, Pearl! Now she was stuffing them back where they had been all along, pushing them back into the rent of the cloth of the dolly, her doll Jenny, that was held closely with the safety pin beneath the shabby toy dress. John fell to his knees and sank his hand into the pile of certificates that had slipped through Pearl's frightened hands, and then the softened footfall in the wet grass at the other end, and the grape arbor told him that the hunter had returned. John! Oh, yes? Preacher standing in the blue mist of the moon, shading his eyes with his hands to see what the children were about. What you doing, boy? I'm getting Pearl ready for bed. And what's taking you so long about it? What are you playing with, boy? Pearl's junk," he said magnificently. "Mom gets mad when playing out here and doesn't clean up. We're just cleaning up." And then he stuffed the last of the bills into the soft cotton body and fumbled the safety pin back into the tear again. Preacher had not stirred, but John could sense that he was alert, suspicious, sniffing. "Come on, boy. It's chilly out there tonight." "Yes, sir." And now he arose and held out the doll to Pearl, and then turned facing the long and interminable distances to the end of the green arbor where the dark one waited, giving the doll into the frightened hands of his sister, and taking one of those hands then he began to lean and lead her, to walk slowly, ever so cautiously, towards the shape of the man against the blue smoke of the moonlight, and all the while praying awkwardly and badly, because the only prayer he knew was about sin, and this was a prayer about escaping. Preacher cracked his dry palms together in a whip crack of impatience. "Hurry, children!" "How many miles to Babylon?" 80 miles and 10. John heard his righteous, foolish brain reciting softly. "Can I get there by candlelight?" He could see the gleam now of Preacher's watch and chain against the death-grave vest, and thought, "He ain't guessed yet. Thank God, he doesn't know." 1,000 miles to Babylon, 10,000 miles to walk yet to the end of the moonlight grape arbor where a dark man stands, and he walked carefully, slowly, putting one foot in front of the other cautiously and holding Pearl's hand, and thinking with growing nausea, "But he heard me talk about cleaning up. Won't he think, oh God, cleaning up, where's the paper? I hear rustling, where's the paper dolls?" And now he stood directly before him. The watch chain gleamed like a fire before John's eyes, and he did not breathe, did not move, waiting. "Now," said Preacher, "up to bed with both of you." And now he was walking slowly up through the yard towards the lamp of the kitchen window, and Preacher was following along behind the boy, found back the flood of hysterical laughter that struggled and welled in his throat. He chucked it back and led Pearl up the porch steps and into the kitchen. "Up, up," scolded Preacher. "Hurry." On the steps he thought with a child's strange and wondrous irrelevance. "There's a moon tonight. Maybe it won't rain. Maybe Uncle Bertie will take me fishing in Dad's skiff tomorrow." Within half an hour Willow returned home from the spoons, and John listened to her voice and the voice of the Preacher below the bedroom, in the kitchen, and presently her footsteps creaked on the back stairs, and the door opened a crack. "John?" "Yes, Mom," he whispered because Pearl was asleep. "Are you in bed?" "Yes." "And Pearl too?" "Yes, Mom." He thought, then he'd seen it after all. He guessed that he had let her be the one to come up to take the doll downstairs and cut it open with the knife and find the money. "Did you pray?" "Oh, I forgot, Mom. Get out of bed. Get Pearl up, too." He shook his sister's arm, awoke her, whining and yawning with sleep, and together they knelt, and he felt the cold, rough boards on his knees under the little night skirts, and opened one eye he saw the moon, like a dandelion through his eyelashes, and listened while Willow's shrill, angry voice talked for a while about sin and salvation. When they were back in bed, she stood by the bed for an instant, her tired hands growing old too soon, folded before her waist. "Were you impotent to Mr. Powell again tonight, John?" "Mom, I didn't mean it." "What were you doing?" "He asked about the money again, Mom." "You know that's not so, John. You always make up that lie. You're always saying that Mr. Powell asked you about the money. There's no money, John. Can't you get that through your head?" "Yes, I told him." "You think you can turn me against him, don't you, John?" she whispered. "Don't you know he's a man of God?" He said nothing, and heard a whippoorwill swoop and cry in the meadows, where the river mist shone like lamb's wool beneath the moon. "You sinned, boy," she said, "and God to forgive you for making up that lie about Mr. Powell." "What's a sin?" said Pearl suddenly, rising with a doll in her arms. "Hush, Pearl. Did you hear me, John?" "Yes. Ask God to forgive you. Ask him, God. Forgive me," he said, "God." And she closed the door, and the tired footsteps stole away down the back stairs to the kitchen again, and presently Pearl spoke dreadful words. "John,
What? John, I don't know another sin tonight. I think I done another sin. I cut up 2 of them, only 2, John. I cut them out with the scissors, the faces. He thought, so I will be God, that I won't be so scared of him. I forgive you, he said, but don't never do that again, Pearl, and don't never take 'em out again. You hear me, Pearl? Yes, yes, John, I swear. And she fell asleep again, facing the summer moon, dreaming. Come back, you naughty children, she cried in the dark nest of sleep. But the paper children spun away in the summer wind, beyond recall, beyond heeding, whirling and dancing over the buttercups in the sun. It is the night for dreams. John sleeps, and one again he is playing in the grass behind the smokehouse with Pearl in the late afternoon of an Indian summer. There comes Dad yonder, he cried, jumping to his feet, and Pearl stood up too with the doll named Miss Jenny in her arms. Where, John, where? See, there comes the car down yonder. You can see it through the apple trees. When Ben Harper's Model T rounded the bend in the lane below Jason Lindsay's orchard, the loud racket of its pounding engine always drifted clear and sharp towards the house. Now the old car bounced and rattled up the rut in the yard below the grape arbor. Ben fell through the door and came staggering up towards the house. Dad! Hey, Dad! John ran down the yard towards him, thinking, I'll bet he has brought me and Pearl a present from the 5 and 10 because he is acting funny, and when he plays jokes on me like this, there's always a little poke in his coat pocket with a cat pistol or a toy-led streetcar or something like that. Dad! Hey, Dad! Ben whirled and staggered, squinting his stunning and bloodshot eyes towards the direction of the voice, and wiped his hands across his face as if to tear away a veil that had fallen there. Hey, Dad, you bring me a present? He could hear Pearl stumbling along behind him on her short legs, wailing for him to wait, and then he was looking up at his father, seeing the eyes, seeing the torn shirt sleeves, the dark spreading stain. Dad, what's wrong? Where's Willa? Where? She ain't here. She's gone to Crespin's Landing to buy some calico. Dad, what's wrong? You're bleeding. Dad! Ain't nothing. Now listen to me, boy. Dad, you're hurt bad. Boy, listen to me. There ain't much time, John. Listen. And the boy listened for a moment and then saw the gun in Ben's left hand and the thick rolls of banknotes in the other. Then he began to scream. The world was gone mad, and Ben Harper stuck the pistol in his heavy motorcycle belt with the big glass studs and slapped at the boy smartly across the face. Listen to me, John. For God's sake, listen. Pearl put her finger in her mouth, watched with grave eyes. I'd done something in Moundsville, Ben whispered, wincing and swaying a little as against the wind. They're coming to take me, boy. Dad. Hush, hush, boy. This money's here. Dad. I stole it, John. Yes, I stole all this money. John did not know what stole meant, but he knew it was all right because it was Ben. They must have get him, whispered Ben, his eyes gone crazy now. None of them. Don't tell Willa. Do you understand me, boy? Not even your mom. Dad, you're bleeding. Hush, John, just listen. John thought, I must go to the screaming again because then he will think I'm a coward the way I was the day the moccasin bit me. Oh, the cathills were fighting fish. We got to hide it. Now think, boy, where? We got to hide the money before they come to take me, John thought. But why not give them the money? Then they won't be mad anymore. The men are coming. There's close to $10,000 here, boy, and it's yours. Yours and little Pearl's. He thought, I don't want the money, Dad, because already some of the red has dripped off onto the green numbers, and if I touch the money, it will get on my hands, and Mom will think I've been fighting. Think, boy, think. Where? Behind a stone in the smokehouse? Yes, that... No. Under the brick, under the grape arbor. No, they dig it for it. Pearl knew it was all a game her dad and John were playing, and she sat down suddenly in the daisies and threw Miss Jenny high above her head, falling back into the ironweed and Queen Anne's lace, kicking her legs at the sun. I just can't clear my mind. Ben was crying, shaking his shoulders like a wounded dog. What happened? God almighty, what was I thinking? Because she ain't strong enough for it. In her hands, it would be just like a gun. She dragged them all to hell headlong. No, I remember now. It's for them. Yes, that's why I done it. Sure, that's it. Them kids.
That Pearl and John, that's the way it was." John looked at the trees and the hills behind the black hood of the smoked Model T, and each thing in the world had a tiny fringe of red around it, and he felt the sour bile of fear well against his back tongue, and he swallowed hard and clenched his fists like small, hard apples, and thought, "When the moccasin bit me down in the cattails, I was ashamed because I was scared, and I screamed when Dad taken his gutting knife and cut the plate to make it bleed so I wouldn't die." Now Ben made eyes open and squinted and opened wide again and focused on the doll in Pearl's arm, and he smiled as if under the impact of a fresh and wonderful revelation. "Why, sure, in the doll, sure, that's there." There was a torn place in the doll's cloth back, and he had a safety pin to keep it closed, and now Ben fell to his knees and scrambled through the grass towards her and lifted the doll from her hands. No, Miss Jenny." Wait now, honey, I won't hurt her none. Pearl, baby, just wait, honey." But Pearl wailed in anguish when Ben plucked the safety pin loose, and the rent place fell open, and he reached in and tore out a great wad of cotton stuffed from the dolly's body, and then stuffed the thick roll of the green bills inside. Now look then. And then the pin was back, and the cheap little doll dress had fallen, and the doll was back in Pearl's hands, and she had stopped crying and squat cross-legged in the grass, snuffing angrily and glaring at her father. "You hurt her." "Ah, nah, she ain't hurt, baby. That little spot of blood on her dress, that ain't doll's blood, Pearl, honey. It's mine." "No, she's all right." And he struggled to his feet again, swaying and passing the back of his hand over his sick eyes, his face drawn and lean like the face of the Christ in Passion. "Listen, John, listen to me now. You must swear, boy. Swear, boy." "What? Swear means promise, John. You must promise that you will take care of Pearl yonder. That's the first thing, boy. Promise, swear." Yes, with your life, boy." "Yes, Dad, and then swear you'll keep the secret. About the money. No matter who asks, never tell. Never let them know, boy. Not even Willa, not even your mom." "Yes, Dad." "Swear." "Yes, I swear. And when you grow up, you and Pearl, it'll be yours. Do you understand that, John? Do you swear? Say it, boy. Say, I swear I'll guard Pearl with my life, and I won't never, ever tell about the money." John repeated it with thick, fumbling tongue. "And you, Pearl, you swear too." She did not know what the game was about, but she laughed and said yes, and then fell to pouting again, hugging and wounded Jenny to her with fresh anger what he had done to her baby, then heard the whine of the motors, and the 2 touring cars appeared in the bend, in the lane, and the corner of Jason Lindsay's orchard. "Here they come. They're coming yonder, boy. Mine now." "Where are you going, Dad?" "Away, boy, away." "You're bleeding, Dad." "It's nothing, boy, just a scratched shoulder." "But there's blood, Dad." "Hush, John, mind what I told you." "Yes, Dad." "And you too, Pearl, you swore." And now the blue men were coming close, and she thought, this is part of the game too, and she watched them move cautiously through the tall grass, the tan, grim faces white around the lips. There are guns in the hand, and one of the men spit the dark jet of amber into the daisies. Even 3 or 4 steps he took. "Drop the gun, Harper." They circle now, 2 of them fanning out below the smokehouse, 2 of them in the grape arbor, another standing up tall and fearless among the black-eyed Susans with the blue gun ready in his hand. "We've got you, Harper. Better give it up. We don't want the kids hurt." "I'm going now, John. Goodbye." The boy's lips convulsed. Steady. Ben does not hear the tiny whimper in his throat. "Just mind what you swore, John." "Yes, Dad." "And take care of Pearl. Guard her with your life, John." "Dad? Who them blue men yonder?" "Never mind them. They come, and I'm going away with them, John. That doesn't matter, boy. Just mind what you swore. Mind, boy." "Yes." Now the child leaps and waits, sweating and quivering under the sheet. He is lying in bed in the cold summer moon, and the silver coin stuck in the window pane, and Pearl is breathing softly in the bed beside him. He is wide awake now, and he knows where he is, and that it is now instead of then, and yet he thinks, just because I'm awake don't mean that the dream isn't still going on out there. Now the blue men are moving up through the grass below the smokehouse again. Now they are hitting him with the shiny wooden sticks and the blue guns, and they are dragging him away to the big cars. And there's a dream, and me watching it happen. And when they are gone, I will still see it in the grass. I'll see under the Queen's Anne lace where it fell out of his coat, the pocket, when they were hitting him, the little brown paper poke with the jewel's harp. It's for me, and the toy baby bottle with the real rubber nipple for Pearl's doll, because he never come home on Friday once without bringing us a present from the 5 and dime. Not ever once. Yes, it's in the night for dreams. Willa had prayed for nearly half an hour on her knees before crawling into the ancient brass bed beside the sleeping body of the man, and even after she in bed she begins praying again automatically, and she has fallen asleep in the middle of a phrase and finds herself thinking how strange it is that spring is gone and here is a sudden winter, and the window has grown thick with a horse of the gas of the flickering forest of blue and yellow in the asbestos of the bedroom fireplaces, and it has been beside her in the bed. Why, it has none ever happened that they are only been married 2 months, and here they are in a big house her uncle had left her. You asleep, hon? Gee, but I love you, Willa. Me too, Ben. Sometimes I think it's just too plain wonderful to be real one moment. I'm so happy I could dance, and the next minute I'm sad. Sad, honey. Yes, sad like when they die in the show, and I keep thinking, well, it just can't last, you and me, Willa. It'll last, she said, and he embraced her then, and she had closed her eyes and thought about their wedding night at the tourist cabin, their honeymoon, and outside the window that turned playing over and over. She had worn out her pretty thing she had. She wore her green wool skirt and the jacket to her old suit and the lace dicky that was still good, and she didn't have a single new thing, but it didn't matter because she knew she was going to make him happy. When he looked across the room at her hanging her clothes on the chair, the record started playing again. Lucky Lindy up in the air, Lucky Lindy flew over there, and he stared at her with the gentle, burning eyes that said how beautiful her breasts were. It was the first time he had seen her naked. Why, sure they are, she laughed, blushing, eyes flashing, running to him, still giddy from the whiskey they had drunk. Why, sure. It's the only pretty thing I owned, my pretty figure. A dream within a dream, lying there in bed with him and thinking about the short time they had been married and all the wonderful time to be. What'll it be, honey? He whispered afterward. A boy? Maybe we'll have a girl? A boy first, then a girl. What next? More boys? Heck no, honey. 2 will be enough. He fell silent, brooding and far away from her, as it often was with him. What's wrong, Ben? Ah, nothing. Yes, what is it? She reached out her finger and pulled his stubby chin across so she could look into his eyes and find the trouble. What is it, Ben, honey? I just keep thinking that I don't want any kids of mine ever knowing the hard times I had. They won't, honey. We'll be rich someday. Rich, selling rakes and hoes and onion sets at the hardware store? No, honey, you'll get something better. Maybe you'll start a store of your own someday. Well, maybe. You will, Ben. I know it. He sighed long and deep, and she could sense that his desperate eyes stared into the flickering gas of the fireplace, searching there among the guttering blue and gold phantoms for the vision of the big tomorrows. It don't matter so much about you and me, he said. We'll always get along no matter how rough it gets. I don't get that awful feeling when I think about you wanting, me wanting, but I'll never let the kid of mine want. Doesn't matter how I get, no young'un of mine will ever want for nothing." "I know, darling. I know, honey," she whispered, soothing his brow, his quivering eyelid, with her loving, gentle hands, her fingers bright with the pretty dime store ring that he wed her with. But now she woke and caught her breath, knowing it had not been real, that it had been only a dream, and she felt ashamed and commenced to pray again, because it had been adultery, thinking it was Ben Harper in the bed there with her, and dreaming that had embraced her in a way the preacher had helped her see was the devil's way. The moon rode high in a pale, unblemished sky above the river. Willa's eyes shone at her gray lips moved soundlessly in the darkness, in the shadow of the body of the man beside her. "Praise the Lord," she whispered fiercely. "Praise the Lord." And in another part of that same night, Icy and Walt prepared for bed. After Icy has turned out the gas lamp in the hallway, she went back into the bedroom and removed her teeth and put them in the fresh tumbler of water by the bedside. Walt rolled over to face her and rose on his elbow. "You sure all them lights is out downstairs, Mother?" "Yes, I'm sure." It always irritated her to have him make her talk in bed after she put her teeth in the water glass. Yet Walt was in a mood for talk. "Icy, I'm worried about Willa." Icy grunted and pressed her face deeper into the feather bolster, but Walt's words interested her so much that she could not think of sleep. She sat up and, fetching her dripping dentures from the drinking glass, and fitted them in her mouth again with a faint sucking click. "Well, how do you mean, Walt?" He was silent for a moment until she nudged him impatiently with a fat elbow. "I'm figuring," he said, "how I can say it so you won't get mad." "Say what, Walt?" "You can be the most—" "There's something," he interrupted. "Something wrong about it, Mother. Something I can't name. Something I feel in my bones." "About what? About him, about Mr. Powell, all of it." "Walt?" "Now, Mother, a body can't help these feelings." But she was out of bed now, standing there in the dark, and he heard her fumble for a match to light the lamp. She stood now in a pale light, glowering at him furiously. "May the Lord have mercy on you, Walt Spoon." "Mother, that man of God offering that widow the only salvation left to her and their fatherless kids." He sighed and closed his eyes, pretending to be trying to sleep again. But he opened them again, submitting to her lashing stare. "You're no better than that boy," she said. He said nothing, sorry already that he had spoken, seeing a night of arguing ahead of him because of his foolish candor. Thinking evil, she said. "You're making up tales on that poor man." "Mother, Lying tales," snapped Icy, rousing herself now to fresh wrath. "Willa has told me all of it. How that boy accused Mr. Powell of talking about the money all the time. He says the boy had hid it somewheres. Such lies as would shame. Oh, and now you, Walt Smooth, how could you dare?" "Well, I was wrong," he sighed, "now that I think about it." "Yes, you were," she said, but stood a moment longer to glare at him before she huffed out the light and crawled back into bed beside him. "Yes," he said, after a spell of consideration, "I was wrong. Sometimes we misjudge them, most that serve the Lord best." He heard her sniff and knew that she had forgiven him, that she had retired into herself in triumph, and that now he might rest. Yet presently he roused from half-sleep to feel her shake lightly with laughter. "What's eating you, old woman?" "Oh, shoot, Walt, just thinking." "Well, what? About all that money," she said. "Yes," he said, "all that money just laying there moldering on the riverbed. Ain't it enough to make a body ponder? Lordy, yes. I swear sometimes I get an awful itch to rent a skiff and go dragging for it. Shucks,
You never hook it. Not a million years, Walt Spoon. Shame on you. I was just joking. Pshaw, I wouldn't touch that filthy, bloody stuff for nothing. Shame on you, boy. Her hand rose to her mouth then. The lips gasped suddenly, and presently the teeth settled gently, grinding in the glass of spring water, while Icy turned her back on them and fell into a healthy sleep of fat, innocent child. Yet Walt Spoon laid awake. It was something he had heard to do in their marriage, hammering his thoughts into the shape she wanted. It was a price apiece of sleep itself. Whatever unframed, as yet unshaped suspicions he had of the preacher were soon gone, stamped and trodden into the soil of domestic orthodoxy. It's true, he thought. He's a man of God. Yes, anyone can tell that. And he slept then, his snore soon mingling in rough counterpoint to those of the old woman. Only the teeth in the glass maintained their ironic vigilance, smiling reflectively above the head of the innocent sleepers.